Awesome. No audio. That's great. Gonna edit that right the fuck out when we go with the finished video later. It's okay. We're used to this. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna start over. I'm gonna acknowledge a bunch of people. So I'm gonna acknowledge chat and then we'll get right into it. So Brendan Haley, Bjorn Jorgensen, Fighting Code Names, new name. Welcome to the stream and thank you so much for joining us here. I hope you'll enjoy your stay. Jesse Hughes, the Epic Badger. I did believe I said Jim Largo. We got Keith Knight. What's up, mate? How you doing? Kieran Ball, for one of the first to let me know there's no sound. Thank you, guys. Rez Gordon Lake, thank you very much. I believe you're a new name as well. And Jim, we cannot hear you. Not even Scottish, and we're going Scottish. That's great. Appreciate that. And I also want to bring up the first super chat of the evening from the Epic Badger saying, smash the like button, all you glorious people out there. So appreciate that, really and truly. And Kieran Ball's right. It was better without sound. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, who wants to hear me talk? And with that in mind, I'm going to bring our guest on here in just a few moments. Normally on the show, we have community members that collect toys or folks that either create their own videos or just are a repository of history, someone I already know. Tonight is something new. We have a creator of a brand new IP, a new toy property that is still very much in the incubation stage. And I've never had a chance to talk to somebody at that level at that time. And I was really intrigued when someone tipped me off to the Savage Crucible IP. And I've looked into it. And after reading some things, seeing some things, decided I got to talk to this guy. So tonight, my guest is none other than Rob Post from Savage Crucible. Please welcome him to the show. Mr. Post, how are you, sir?
Well, guys, thanks for having me.
No worries. We're going to get right into it because there's going to be a myriad of questions that people are going to want to ask about this line, about you. So I don't even want to mince words. We're going to hop right in. We're going to talk about you a little bit. His bio from the website is right here. I don't expect you to read it. I've read it. I like what I see here. As I was saying before we went on the stream, we're both born of military families. We both joined the service at probably around the same time. His background is in SIGINT, TSSCI stuff, which is right in line with what I was doing. You do state in the bio that you were an Arab linguist during that time. And I have many friends who were and are Arab linguists. So I was like, oh, one of my people. So gave me a personal sense of satisfaction to be like, I can relate to where this guy's been in life. Now, you've been all over the place. You've done contracting for a while. What made you decide to pursue a master's in supply chain and logistics after the experiences that you had in the military and as a contractor? It's a bit of an odd shift in career. What informed that?
Oh, Lord. So that's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. For those not in the know, when you go work for the DoD, based on certain skill sets, you can pretty much spend your entire career outside of the United States. And I think it's fair to say after 2 years in the desert, using the same porta potty, I didn't want to be overseas anymore. So the best career path that I could come up with at that point was sort of a changing gears, go to grad school and get a corporate job, because they do not like to let their assets come home, is the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So this was something where it was meant to be almost your escape hatch, so to speak. And you're not the first person to tell me something along those lines. So this was kind of, well, I need to do something. And that kind of was what you decided on at the time. Now, you've also done consulting for some accounting firms, which I don't want to get too deep in because that's not why we're here. But it does say specifically that, you know, you're really into science fiction and fantasy, which leads right into the next thing that we really need to talk about, which is what in the hell is Savage Crucible anyway? Like, Where did the concept come from? What made you go, I can do this? And then what made you say, I'm going to do this? Tell us about the basic concept, and then we'll go deeper as we go along.
Well, Savage Crucible honestly is the byproduct of trying to come up with certain mechanics to create a fantasy world that allowed you to not be pigeonholed for any length of time. And mixed with that, a little bit of my own fun fascination with ancient mythology and certain cultures that may or may not have existed at one point, like Lemuria or Atlantis or something of that nature. And I think you can sort of create a world that plays to that and allows you to have fantasy, but also a little bit of science fiction that could be quite possibly believable. And that's all I really want to say about what Savage Crucible is. I mean, I was actually just going through the last color pages today, and so we're looking at putting out the graphic novel either during the Kickstarter or maybe just prior to it. We haven't decided yet on that, but I would rather that be the first introduction than letting me kind of ruin it for everybody.
Okay. And just for the sake of, for those of you that are deep into lore or know any of the lore of previous toy lines, this is something that it seems that you're trying to create the world first, and then the toys, the collectibles are a part of expressing that, rather than here's these great design ideas, now I have to figure out how they all fit together. That's the impression that I'm getting. Would you say that's accurate?
Sometimes, yes, it is. Sometimes you just have a fantastic design and you're like, okay, where does this fit in? Other times there's an archetype or a type of character that I really, really love that might be underutilized that I want to see more of. And so that's where I base it off of. Excuse me. I would think that for them, I can't give it a percentage. It's not half and half, but it just depends on which artist is working on something, whether it's a concept artist, a sculptor, or myself for my own ideas, determines how much of that is preordained and how much of it is that's so awesome you throw it in there. So a great instance is Lee Robinson is a sculptor for MAFC and done some work for Savage Crucible, and he threw out this idea of what a Death Weaver is, and this was the most disgusting, savage thing that I could think of. And I was like, hell yes, there are Death Weavers in Savage Crucible. And essentially, if you can think of a Death Weaver as a giant spider with a humanoid head that basically decapitates people and then burrows itself into the body to take control of the body, that's a Death Weaver.
Well, I like the concept, and it flows right off the tongue, the Death Weaver. I do want to touch very lightly on the lore, because you also touch very lightly on the lore at this stage of the game. This is the only lore paragraph that there is, and I will read this to our audience. Our homeland is beyond comprehension, young one. We very well may be the center of all things, the origin point for everything that is, was, or will be. No Oxford comma, you might want to notice. For the crucible in which the universe forged all other worlds. Fascinating paragraph, and obviously you're keeping this very close to the chest, so I'm not going to insult you by asking, what does that mean? We'll find out as time goes on, from what I can see here. And you do have one of the most interesting pieces of concept art out there that typically in a toy line, this is not the sort of thing you're going to see prior to its production. You have full-blown maps for the worlds that these characters are going to live in. What? Okay, so this is a smattering, if you will. You're a tease. I bet you were fun at parties.
There's a warning label on the first image, sir. That's where I'm going with
that. Okay, so I'll bring that one up here just so we can see. If there's a warning label, I mean, I'm all for it. I grew up in the days of the PMRC. I know what it's like, and so I want to see if we're going like, hey, this is just kind of a concept thing. There's more to come, or if this is something else. what it says here, this cartographic maps is a collection of many sources of gathered from across the world, and thus may not be entirely accurate. My professional opinion that no information in this text should be taken as complete fact. So, is that the warning label you're talking about?
That is the warning label.
Hey, I can read. It's great. It's awesome. So, to pull this back a little bit, you did bring up Lee J. Robinson, and that for me also speaks to something I've heard you talk about in the past, where you have a very wide and diverse group of artists, writers, cartographers, and animators that are contributing to this. Not just in terms of amount of people, but backgrounds, skill sets, countries of origins. Something I heard you say, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that you didn't want this to be another IP that was just created by a bunch of old white guys. Um, and that really spoke to me. I was like, okay, all right, this guy's in the 21st century. Um, what drove that? What made you say I got to go far and wide?
All right, so nothing against old white guys, since I am one, clearly.
Same.
But when you're talking about fantasy, you know, there when you're talking about Caucasian, Western fantasy, you're talking about Tolkien or some derivative of that. And usually that also has some, Blizzard influences as well. What made Witcher so popular, in my opinion, is that it started bringing in some of that Eastern European lore that a lot of us didn't know that was very twisted. And so there's a lot of lore like that throughout the world from different cultures that's really enriching. And there's a lot of similarities, obviously, but there's also a lot of differences with some unique ideas and twists. And so I didn't want to rehash the same thing that had been done again. I didn't just want to create an orc and a dwarf with just, maybe better articulation than what had been done in the past. I wanted to add something, a new element to it that people could really attach to. And also I thought was really important for me personally, I like to think of worlds that I'm in and how I would act. And that was very important to me in the Savage Crucible lore, is this concept of what would you do there and why. And so that's part of it. And it's something that'll get explored a little bit in the first graphic novel. But I think you'll start to understand how big that potential mechanic can be going forward.
Sure. So you're trying to draw from non-traditional spaces combined with your own kind of perspective on where things have been to try and see where you're going. So short of it being an ego trip, you're trying to innovate. You want to do something different. What's the point of going through this if it isn't different? That's what I'm hearing. Uh, so I'm already seeing a lot of questions in chat about like, are these treasure hunting maps, and are we going to get a skinwalker type creature? Um, if it's not on the site and it hasn't been released, I'm already getting the feeling. And bear in mind, this is the first time I've ever spoken to Rob. I get the feeling if it's not out there, he's not going to tell you. Like that seemed. If I'm wrong, you stop me and just go ahead and answer that question. But
some things I might tell you that are near and dear to my heart. That it's and I'll be honest, sometimes there are certain types of characters that are sort of roadblocks for me that I don't really get excited about. I love D&D, and I saw Gordon's in the chat somewhere, so he always cringes when I say this, but I'm not the biggest elf fan. I just have never been that big of an elf fan. Doesn't mean we won't do our version of elves or something to that in that regard, but it's just not something that I personally am passionate about. But that's the great thing about having a very diverse team, is that you have those people that are passionate about it and can really bring it to life in a different way. And so that's where you have to have a wide team to really, in my opinion, bring new ideas forward.
I think that's an important component. And just since we're talking about what we're passionate about, one of my moderators, Gojitron, and I are both huge kaiju fans. We're big into the big monsters and lizards. So I want to pull up this Lizard Man concept art by Taryn Fiddler. I'm all about these reptilians, man, and it's not because I have some conspiracy theory thing in the back of my head. I've just always been fascinated by bipedal reptilian creatures. So when I saw this and I saw some of the other concept art on the Instagram page, I was like, okay, I'll give this a shot. Um, we're just using this as an example. What was the gestation of this?
All right, so depends on the artist, and that's really where you have to kind of know who you're dealing with. And so Taryn is a prolific artist in that he does a lot of humanoid anthropomorphic monsters, and so that's his forte. That's what he does a fantastic job of, and he's been doing these characters for years. And I wanted his characters are a little bit friendlier when you go to his Instagram and Twitter page. And so I was challenging him to come up with something a little bit more savage, something nastier from that sort of feel. But I really did like the look of his characters. They have a very top heavy Motu feel to them in terms of their musculature. So that's where that was going. And so what I really like to do is pull certain pieces from each artist and incorporate that into the actual sculpt. That usually works out really well. So lots of times you might not really think about a blade that looks like that, and he pulls it in, and the little tassel at the end is a really nice touch. I think what you do in a case like this is, and I saw the Harbinger of the Abyss, which is a character that I just absolutely love. A lot of people were disappointed that the sculpture is not as broad based or as muscular as his art. Well, the problem with that is that all of Taryn's art looks like that to a certain degree because that's what he likes. Now he has some other characters in there that we challenged him with that he did a fantastic job on, and they're a lot slimmer. But not everybody can be that big Motu size thing. I didn't want to do a Motu Lizard Man again. I wanted to do a different take, something new, something that I envisioned in my head. And so I think on the last interview I was on, we talked about how the great thing about our childhood is we don't remember the way things are. We remember them the way that we wanted them to be. And so I challenge anybody to go look at the G1 Optimus Prime. That thing is horrifically ugly. Like it is, it's horrible. And I mean, you guys remember the box art where the artist basically just copied that G1 Optimus on the back. It looks horrible, goofy as all hell. But we all love the cartoon G1 Optimus, and that's what we were imagining when we were playing with the kids. So that's what I wanted to make, is what we actually imagined, not what somebody else has already brought to life.
And this is not. Is this the same character?
It's a different character. That is a lizard reptilian. That is a rhino iguana. I think it's a rhino. I think it's a rhino iguana head that Lee did. And that goes back to having different artists bringing different aspects to it. So the concept art for that armor actually comes from Rubus, and it was sculpted by Nick Whitmore. The first head up top was sculpted by Lee J. Robinson. The original body itself was sculpted by Arlen Pelletier, and the more humanoid head on the bottom right was sculpted by Arlen as well. And so I like for them all to bring their own unique twist to it. And that goes back to, so what does everybody think of in a lizard? A lizard man or a reptilian or a serpent? Everybody has a slightly different idea of what they appeal to based on what they were exposed to, whether it was in gaming or reading or whatnot, and what they imagined. And so some people think of reptilians as having closer to humanoid heads, and some people think of them looking more like dinosaurs. Well, why the hell can't you have both? So, and that one more humanoid one is actually a half breed, and that's something that I love about D&D is you always have half breeds, half barbarian, half orc, half dwarf, things of that nature. And so why not have a half lizard, half human? And how does that happen? How do you go about something like that? How does that take place? Because Savage Crucible is a pretty brutal world. It's not friendly. There's no ponies walking around.
It doesn't strike me as the kind of place where you're going to get a Starbucks coffee and just walk around the world. Definitely strikes me as a bit more of a kill or be killed situation. Now, when we talk about inspiration, you've talked about Eastern stuff, whether it be factually regarded as mythos that existed. You've also you've alluded to some fictional stuff, and there's a certain estate that might be on the phone with you when they see this. I'm just going to throw that out there. Someone likes Lovecraft a little bit, don't they?
I do love Lovecraft, but it's all in the public domain, so I don't think I'll be getting any phone calls.
Good catch. Good catch. I mean, the man knows his shit, ladies and gentlemen. All right, that's fair. And I gotta say, I love this take on that type of creature. It shows humanoid aspects. You've got tentacles that are forming the arm and musculature. But for me, the coup de grace are the horns coming out like an octopus with daggum horns. Okay, all right, I'm in. I like this. This will work on my shelf. Would you like to talk about this figure or the inspiration behind it?
Sure. And so when I started coming up with ideas for the line, I really wanted cultists. I felt like cultists had been underrepresented in the action figure world. There's not like cool guys standing around with hoods that look evil, that you can have some kind of crazy satanic setting or, evil setting or whatever. But that going back to, power always corrupting. So that's where the idea came from. So I wanted a cultist monster, and that's what I tasked Arlen with. That was all he had to go on. Cultist and monster. And this is what he came back with. And I immediately, when I saw this, thought of the King in Yellow, which is not from H.P. Lovecraft. It predates him. But it's immediately who I thought of. And so when I thought of this guy, I was like, where does this guy come from? And I was thinking like preacher, he used to be a human, something corrupted him. And that's where the Harbinger of the Abyss came from, and that whole cult. And so that's a very long, overarching story that the first graphic novel starts on a little bit, touches on, and sort of towards the first 10 years or so. And so we'll get to see him, but over the next couple of graphic novels, you'll get to see him transform into what he really is, and get some backstory on why.
Okay. Now that we're getting into more of the sculptures and the figure designs, I'm going to show one of the explosion pictures of the actual sculpt of the character here later, a character later, because now we've talked a little bit about the lore. We've talked a little bit about you. We've talked a little bit about the concept and conceptual characters, the diversity of the team. Here come some of the questions that people are going to ask. This is a 6.5 to 7 inch scale, which is more or less a true 1/12 scale. Biggest toy lines in the world right now are more of a 6-inch scale, even though they say it's 1/12. It's not really 1/12. But for the folks that like to mix and match and like the kit bash and customize, which I know is something you have a very big background in, what has driven the decision to make these that truer 6.5, 7 inch, where they might be mired when it comes to the mix and match? So like these are not going to display right next to a Motu Origins figure. They might next to a Masterverse or Action Force, G.I. Joe Classifieds, Marvel Legends. These are not going to blend necessarily with a pretty wide range of figures, which is a big selling point. What drove that decision?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the actual character itself. I think some of the monster type characters will blend no matter what the scale is, just depending on what you have in mind. The great thing about lizard people is they can be any height. The humans is definitely an issue when it comes to that in terms of the height and blending. Our figure is not going to do really well with a slimmer Marvel Legends character. It's going to look pretty different. But when I show the guys and I talk to them, I always show this wonderful picture, and you guys can Google it. It has Arnold Schwarzenegger, Will Chamberlain, and Andre the Giant. And we all agree that Arnold Schwarzenegger is a massive human being. But when you go look at that picture, he looks like a shrimp. They literally pick him off the ground like 2 or 3 feet, and he's 2 or 3 feet to their heads. He's dangling. So when you look at humans, there is a very, very wide scale in actuality compared to what the average toy collector has in their mind. That also goes back to the proportions, and something that we were trying to go with on the proportions was I wanted something that was more CrossFit like in human proportions, using that Da Vinci frame, but more CrossFit. Not huge. We didn't want like super exaggerated wingspans where people couldn't, their wingspan didn't equal their height and things of that nature. We wanted to be more true because we knew that would give us a better chance at hitting the articulation and the poses that we wanted. So there's always a give and take when you think about that in terms of what you're going for aesthetically and also what you're trying to go for in terms of articulation.
Much better answer than I expected, to be honest. I expected something along the lines of, they're fucking aliens, dude. Shut up. But that works. That works for me. So you speak about articulation. One of the things that's a big push with Savage Crucible and something that really intrigued me was the point of articulation where you can have a double-handed weapon or sword pose, which is something we seldom, if ever, see in the toy world. And this blow-up picture should give folks at home a pretty good idea of how much it's going to take to machine these figures to be able to do that, amongst other things. Was that something where you said, I want to be able to hold a broadsword with two hands because that's realistic, and then leads you to this? Like, walk me through the process of how you get from, hey, that wouldn't be fucking cool to have a broadsword in two hands, but we get to this.
So honestly, that was one of the key, I don't want to say commands, but tenets of when we were designing the figures, that they had to have two-handed poses. I spent a lot of time buying a lot of action figures, old and new, anything that I thought might have something unique in terms of articulation that I hadn't seen before. A lot of stuff from Japan and places like that, and sort of combining certain aspects that they had shown in other lines and coming together to what I think is a pretty good trade-off between articulation and aesthetic. Probably, I wanted to keep the aesthetic as pleasing as possible while still having a lot of articulation. Something I don't like about some of the highly articulated figures is you really can lose a sense of the shape. If you look at some of those Japanese models, when they start doing the articulation, articulation's amazing, but they start to get really boxy and lose that shape. So we started asking ourselves what could be done, and we spent a lot of time on that. Now, the first time we were actually in ZBrush and Dave Proctor crossed the arms that were straight and was able to actually cross the wrists. So you can literally have the arms completely straight, and with the forward wingspan there, you can actually cross your wrists. So you can do some really interesting articulation with these based on the prototypes. The knees and elbows, as Robo has astutely figured out, was inspired from Bandai. I can say that. I love a lot of the monster stuff. Godzilla's elbows are pretty awesome in my opinion. So those were things that I wanted, and it's kind of, everybody has their own opinion on what they like and what they don't like, and that's fine. And no one's really wrong there, but those are the things, after going through just hundreds and hundreds of figures, looking for what I thought was the most pleasing, that's what we came up with.
Fair enough. So let's say that there are folks out there that are collecting a Masterverse line or Origins, or I'll say it, Mythic Legions, any of these figure lines that fall in a similar sci-fi fantasy realm, some of which scale, some of which don't. What is it you're hoping will be the hook? What's the reason that we should invest in this? Because for as much research as you've done, for as passionate as you seem to be, for as many talented people as you have, we're still not sure when these are going to be available, what the price point's going to be, or anything. So what do you think right now is the hook for someone who might be prospectively or skeptically looking at this line as a potential collection?
There's a couple. First, it's just the type of characters. To be frank, if you look at the first 6 that were shown to everyone, 4 of those hadn't really been shown in any kind of mass quantity before. A couple of them had never been shown before, like the Harbinger. I think that's a hook. I think those are kinds of characters that people want but don't necessarily get because they're just not mainstream. The other aspect to it is my commitment to the lore and actually having a graphic novel and having a World Bible prior to, I think is a really nice hook. I think the other side to it is that I'm not really trying to, I'm not doing this to make a living. I'm quitting my day job, so to speak. So this is something I'm passionate about and want to do. And yes, I do hope it makes money so that I can make more figures. But the idea behind it is not a cash grab or anything of that nature. It is to really do something for the fans, because I like action figures and I like fantasy, and I personally get tired of the overuse of molds. And I think there's economically a balance to it. I think that to a certain degree, yes, you need to reuse molds to be financially viable at certain quantities. However, I don't think that should encourage you to continually overuse molds in that instance. So I think you have to set out with a set number of, it's kind of like term limits in Congress. It's such a great idea, you know, two terms and you're out. You can't serve anymore. I think that should be the same thing with certain molds. You use them on 3 different characters, it's done. It's retired. You got your money's worth out of it. Send it back to the factory to get recycled. So those are the things that I hope will be the hook. I think it's that there's so many different people that are involved in the team, which is not any different than any other team, but in terms of them collecting action figures. But we all sit together and talk about what do we want that no one will give us that's feasible.
So it seems to me that a tighter way to say this is that you're trying very hard to be by fans, for fans, and fill some niches that maybe aren't being filled at a higher level of quality than someone might just vomit out, rather than pushing something out, it needing iteration, going back to the drawing board, doing it again, like GI Joe Classifieds, for example, but trying to do something that stands uniquely in the space. That sounds like that's the goal. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think that's very accurate.
Okay, fair enough. Now, so all these concepts are great, Rob. You're saying the right things. I like what I'm hearing. You're being really cagey about some of the lore and stuff, but I get that. I understand that you can't put everything out on Front Street. That's not a problem. I understand that part. The biggest question you get asked every day, because I've looked at the comments, is not only when are they going to be available, but how are they going to be made available? And from what I understand, you're on the fence right now about a straight up pre order model or a Kickstarter. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there are certain custom action figure, established custom action figure manufacturers out there that just had a huge scandal with what a pre order versus a Kickstarter fundraiser model is, and it has not boded well in the community. There's a bad taste in people's mouths. Does that factor in to that decision you're ultimately going to make about how to make these available for pre-sale?
To a certain degree. All I can say is that I always try to be as fair as I can to the people that support me, and support the artists that I work with. And that's really important to me. I think that the people that are first in line that show up early to help you establish something should very well be rewarded for that and shouldn't be forgotten or stepped on to try to climb higher. So I can't say that that's what happened in that instance or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm simply just saying that that's something that I'm mindful of, and I make sure that we, or at least I'll try my best not to replicate that sort of that bad taste in your mouth. Now, having said that, there's the problem with any new IP is that there's hunger for more, whether it's figures or lore, but there's also this limitation on how much people can actually spend. Now, sure, there's some mega buyers that don't mind buying, 30 to 50 figures at a time. but the average buyer can't do that.
No,
so I don't want
no,
to alienate. Yeah, I don't want to alienate people out the gate with some huge, wave offering. And so at the same time, I've said this before, the factory doesn't like really big waves. They want smaller waves. It's easier for them to get it out sooner, get it in your hands quicker. People generally like that. So one of the ideas that we're toying with is the potential for a Kickstarter that has 3 waves in the Kickstarter that are released in every 4 to 5 months. Each wave gets released. Now, does that mean that you are in the Kickstarter and you didn't pony up for wave 3? Is that your only chance to get wave 3? No, it's not going to be your only chance. But I do have to come up with some kind of incentive that helps people feel like they got their money's worth for putting the money up front. And that's something that you're always going to have problems with and dealing with. So there's got to be some exclusives for Kickstarter if you have it. It's kind of like, if you order too much extra stock and it just sits there and someone else ponied up money, a year in advance to get that figure, they're going to feel really stupid that they could have waited 18 months, not paid anything, and still got the figure. We all think about that to a certain degree, but it's hard. And then there's not any like silver bullet answers to that question. I think the biggest thing for me when I was going through this was making sure that fans knew that I was putting my own money into this, starting the tooling process, starting the prototype process well in advance, and not relying on their money to do that. So I've already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, my own money, developing this product. So that's something that I'm pretty proud of, but I also feel like that's something that might not get the press that I think it deserves.
Well, short of actually showing the physical receipts, I'm just going to throw this out there, and this is free advice. Show as much as you can. You need to illustrate that however you can, especially when you whether it's a pre-order model on a third-party site or if you're going with Kickstarter. Which, if anyone were asking me what would I prefer, it would be a straight-up pre-order model where you're completely in control. And it's something where you are, in essence, guaranteeing they're going to get something. Because if you do a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, their terms and conditions are very clear. You're not guaranteed shit. And that's a problem. Now, you could augment that by allowing people to give extra or have add-ons where they would pay for certain things to make that happen. But if it's something where you want people to know you've put all this money into it, then you need to show where that money has already gone, what stage you are in, whether that be through photos, videos, video essays, something. You need to establish that up front, because I think that would go a long way. Because when you tell me this at face value, because you seem to be a straight enough person, I have a tendency to believe that that's true. There are going to be people that are going to say, like, well, he can say that. Well, then why is he asking for all this money up front? That's where the Kickstarter versus pre-order thing, at least in terms of perception, can either make the offering or break it. So that's not really a question. I just want to throw that comment at you in public because I know there's other people that are probably thinking the same thing. Because this is not a question of not trusting you at your word. We just met. I believe that you believe this. But the more that you can prove, the less I have to wonder about is true. Does that make sense?
Oh, certainly. And I would say things like, I think on our Instagram page, we do a fantastic job of showing a lot of our videos and our art. And I know you guys have seen some of the articulation videos of those prototypes, and those are prototypes from the factory. Those aren't cheap to have made. Those cost about $1,200 a piece. And so if you realize that I have multiples of 6 different characters made at, they give you a little discount. when you get multiples made. But out the gate, that's just $8,000 to $10,000 just to get a prototype made.
Sure.
Then you realize that the going price for a character is about $3,000 from a sculptor. So six sculptures, that's 18,000 on top of just the prototypes. So you can see how the value keeps going and going. A graphic novel in itself is probably about 15 to 20,000 to have produced, at least a 56-page one. When you're paying a writer, an artist, and a colorist per page, so it's a lot of money. I mean, just the marketing campaign just on the coins itself was about a $16,000 or $17,000 endeavor, and that was just me supporting the people that have purchased from MAFC in the past. So that's all of that is a serious amount of coin. Now to go ahead and have the tooling started, that's on the when people don't realize it's about $30,000 to $35,000 average to have a 6-inch figure made just in the tooling itself. So when you think about that, and so that's why I try to explain to people, like, okay, if you just want to have one action figure made, you got to pay $30,000 for tooling. All right, well, let's say you do you order 3,000 units of it at $10 a piece. It has barely any paint apps on it. All right, well, you're $60,000 in, and you created one figure, and you haven't paid for the sculpting of the figure. You didn't pay for the prototypes. You didn't pay for anybody to paint it. You didn't pay for any concept art. You haven't paid to put it in a package. You haven't paid for any of that. That's just $60,000 out the gate right there. So it's not cheap to have it done, and that's why most people don't do it, and that's why most people fail. It's because they greatly underestimate the cost. I can tell you from my own conversations that too many Kickstarters or lines try to start without interacting with the factory, and we've been interacting with the factory for 2 years now.
Okay. So, and this is, again, I warned you in advance that I was going to try and come at you from all the places I would be. Like if a friend of mine were coming to me and saying, here's what I'm doing, here's what I've done. So I'm trying to speak to you as a friend.
Oh, yeah.
You've put up all this money for all this tooling and the art and everything else, and that's awesome. That's your risk. So the perception would be, if you went with a Kickstarter model, the perception, no matter how hard you try, the perception is going to be that you're trying to recoup some of those upfront costs, and that, of course, you want to make a profit. No matter where they're being ordered, no matter where you click the button, there's going to be needing a profit or a recoupment of cost. But Kickstarters just kind of, again, to me, it's like, all right, I've got this number I have to hit where I break even, and then I can start making some figures. So my question
there is actually a fallacy in your argument. Your fallacy is, and this is the part you don't know, is what are the price points and what are the funding goal?
I was getting to that question, actually. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this. What is the price point? What is the funding goal?
I'm not ready to reveal that. We have a preliminary list out, but what we did, there's two ways of looking at it, and this is a decision that you have to make. So, do you take the money that you spent on the tooling for a certain number of figures, and you say, all right, I'm going to eat that completely, and so those couple of figures have a much lower funding goal, and then the next 2 to 4 figures the gaps are bigger? Or do you take that and you spread it evenly so each of the figures is more attainable to get? And so there's not a wrong answer per se, but there's on the flip side of that, and that just goes back to the nature of people being burned in the past. If your number or your goal is too low, people are like, oh, he can't do that. That's not possible. It doesn't matter that I have 24 Form 2s back there or Form 3 and some other printers back there. It's like $60,000, $70,000 worth of 3D printing equipment. No one cares. They can't come and see it, but it's there. We can take a tour and you can see it. But, there's certain things, and that goes back to this concept that I learned early in life. If you go too cheap, people don't think it's worth anything.
Fair.
And so there's always this balancing act there.
Sure. And I think that, and again, I realize with a business, there's only so much transparency that one can have. I fully recognize that. Um, for as much as you've put on the line here, I think the more transparency you show when that time comes to put out that goal for pre-orders and the per figure price, I think the more transparency you can show of, okay, here's what we're doing. We have all this upfront cost. We do have to recoup it, but I want to try and keep this consistent or whatever verbiage you come up with. I think that's going to help. And you clearly seem to understand that. So I trust that when the time comes, you'll do that. If you don't, I'll call you out as a friend. but um, so I like where you're going with it. I like that you're not backing away from the questions, but the big question that remains is, okay, we don't know what the offering's going to be when the goals are going to be. I know that you guys are close to announcing this. Do you have a date or a time frame in mind for when this is going to actually come to fruition and we'll get to know that information?
Yes, there's definitely a date that I want to hit. I don't know if I will be able to hit that. And that goes back to COVID still being a real issue in China. You know, here in the
Fair
States,
enough.
it's pretty much an afterthought for at least for those people that weren't greatly affected by it. And everyday life doesn't seem to be that much of a stress or impact for the average citizen. But in China, it's still a really big deal because of their zero tolerance policy. So you're still going to see supply chain disruptions. In fact, 3 of the prototypes were supposed to be debuted in Toylanta, and they were actually made. And the factory the city was in got shut down that morning that they were going to take it to the post office. So, you know, that is what it is. You can't do anything about that, right?
No.
But having said all that, I think it's just I don't know. I don't. There are reasons why I don't tell the date right now, and this reason why we say soon. It's not to be ambiguous or to tease people. For speaking from a military intelligence standpoint, there's certain information that you just don't give out, and there's a reason why. And that's all that really needs to be said about that. Now, in terms of price point, there's a price point that we're trying to make sure that we don't go over, just because we feel like that's important to the collector. And it's also going back to another key point of yours. I don't want to take anybody's money and have to sit on it for 2 years. I'd much rather know that I can get the product to them, at least that first wave, a lot faster than they're used to. And that actually has a lot to determine when that announcement will take place.
So it sounds like you recognize you have not all of the control in the situation, but because you recognize you don't have all that control, you're being overly conservative with this until you can say definitively, here's where we're at. Which is fair. I mean, if this was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I would probably be a lot more critical of that answer, obviously. But the reality is that we're not there. Like we're in 2022. We're in a place where things that I pre-ordered from established vendors and established toy lines in October, I'm just getting wind that they might arrive next month, kind of a thing. That's real. That's a real thing, and that's not any one person or entity's fault. It's a combination of factors, and there's a lot of moving parts to this. You know, it's probably more moving parts to the creation of a toy than there are points of articulation in the Savage Crucible line, which is saying something based upon what I've seen. So I am empathetic about your situation. I am sympathetic to the plight, but the collector in me is going like, "Come on, dude." So I'm going to try and press it a little bit.
Okay.
Can we narrow it down to a season and year that conservatively you would like to be able to be somewhere in? Conservatively.
For delivery?
For the pricing to be released and for the pre-order model, whatever it may be, to go up. And then if you're comfortable narrowing it down to that, delivery too.
I would say it would definitely, let's see, let me make sure I remember my seasons correctly. and the months that go with them. Let's see.
Fall starts in September.
I think it could be a spring, summer kind of thing.
Of this year?
Oh yeah, this year.
So okay, so spring, summer this year for the pre-orders.
Mm-hmm.
Now with delivery, conservatively, what season and year are you hoping to hit? With the understanding that these things do change.
Right. No, I would like in an ideal world hit right after Christmas. Get it shipped out before Chinese New Year.
Okay.
Would be the ideal. So
that would be optimal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about a pre-order model getting announced / released somewhere in late spring throughout summer of this year, with the potential and hope that they would be delivered by early January, February of next year, based upon what you're hoping for with the Chinese New Year. Does that sound about right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the hope. Clearly, and folks, if you're watching at home, all this shit can change. All the toy lines that we've seen tried to come up and fail, or have come up, done well, but delays happen. We know these things happen. We're aware of this. There's Action Force on that shelf. Trust me, I get it. So I think that's reasonable. I think that's I hope you do it. I do. But I was fully prepared to hear, well, it might take 18 months or whatever. So I think it's aggressive, but given how many you qualified these statements as we led up to that question, and you seemed confident enough in your answer and comfortable enough that I think you've prepared. If you fall short of it, I'll be surprised. But I'm interested to see where it goes. So if we're talking about a pre-order model that talks, like we said, late spring, which we're in, into summer of this year, how long of a window for pre-orders are we talking about? A month?
About
3 months?
42 or 43 days, roughly.
So a month and a half.
Yeah.
Okay. And what's the reason for that?
You want to cover 2 first of the months and at least 6 Fridays.
Okay. Now, clearly, regardless of the model that you're going with, it seems clear to me that you're going to want the money up front. Are there any plans for incorporating pay over time situations where there's plenty of solutions on the market that you can integrate into a website to allow this, whether it be a Klarna or an Afterpay, Catapult? There's a lot of different options where all you have to do is say, we'll accept this form of payment. They're paying up front for the customer. Customer's paying them over time, so you don't lose anything. Is this something you've considered?
Honestly, not. The one thing that I have considered is making sure that the number of figures is relatively low, and we have committed to not going beyond that, even if all the stretch goals are met.
Can you release that number of figures? How many figures are we talking about?
In total, there'd be 14. And that includes two figures that are like sort of like a low deco, low paint app figures, which are sort of like builders or blanks or whatever you want to call them.
So you're saying for the initial pre-order, 14 figures all in all,
spread across 3 waves.
Spread across 3 waves. So your initial wave might be, so you have 2 figures that are blanks / troop builders, if that's an accurate term.
Mm-hmm.
Shove those off to the side. So would it be fair to say that each wave will have 4 figures in it with the potential of having those blanks available as a bonus for each wave? Is that something you're thinking of, or you're breaking it up in a different way?
No, it's going to be a 6-4-4 is the current layout. The two blanks will be in the first 6.
Okay.
And there's a
So with
reason why
each,
you do it that way. It's to make sure that you don't put added stress on the factory. And so
sure,
what people don't realize is when you have as much tooling as we do, because we're creating such unique figures, the factory doesn't even have the space to sit around and lay out that much tooling
right,
and
sure,
have that many parts in an area to effectively manage that situation. So what you're trying to do is, and you're doing two different things. You're managing the factory in terms of how they want to do something, and then you're managing expectations of your consumer. So
right.
it only makes sense to me if I can get 4 figures in a consumer's hand a lot faster, if I just make those 4 in one batch, that makes everybody happy. That seems like the smarter play. The
Okay.
problem that you have is that when you're starting a new IP and you only have like 3 or 4 figures, it's hard to have the same kind of momentum that's if you have a lot more characters involved.
So in an effort to kind of allay the social media that's going to follow that answer, I'm going to try and ask the question that they're going to try and do the stupid fucking, conspiracy theory bullshit. I'm going to try and get you to answer this here, and if you don't know, that's okay. But I want to try and help you out here.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is when you initially release your pre-order model, whatever it is, 6 figures, you'll have 45-ish days to order those. Second wave, 4 figures, you'll have another 40 to 45 days, and then wave 3. Is that how it's going to work?
No, we think we're probably going to do it as um, all of those figures in approximately 40 something days, but have it split up to where instead of, how like in a typical sort of crowdfunding, they'll have stretch goals and you just unlock 1 figure. We're
Mm-hmm.
gonna have it where we're at least we're gonna try have it where it unlocks. So you start out like on day one being able to order 6 figures. And if that goes well enough, then we will open up 4 more figures. So you're not just trying to add just that one. Um, some of that's counterintuitive to a lot of the crowdfunding works. The reason why you do
Right.
crowdfunding, and someone's talked about it earlier, is in which platform you choose has a lot to do with its reach and also the news cycle. Okay.
Fair
Because
enough.
there's so many different things coming out, you can get lost in that cycle. And that's hurtful because like, oh, I meant to order that, but I forgot that it was even out because I got excited about something else. So that's the great thing about certain stretch goals and limiting it to 1 figure is that every other day there's something unlocking that's newsworthy, blah, blah, blah. It's another email, da, da, da. But it also creates problems at the factory when you have these massive waves of all these different characters. And that's why you don't get your figures for 2 years because they get bogged down. So how do you do that? Well, this is just my idea on how to tackle it. It is a new idea. It's not something that's really been done like this before.
So, and I want to make it clear to anyone watching this that he hasn't said a single thing about MSRP on these figures. For the sake of my math, I'm going to say the figures are $50 a pop. They could be more, they could be less. I don't fucking know.
No,
He
they're not.
hasn't
They're
said
not
it.
going to be more. They're not going to be
Okay.
more. I feel confident that I want to be $40 or less.
Okay. So now we know. The hope is $40 or less. Thank you. I didn't mean to push you too hard into that, but I'm glad that I did because now we know. So $40 a figure, worst case scenario, if possible. It could be more, but he's going to try to avoid that. Fair enough. So I'll say $40. 6 figures, that's $240. Does that include shipping?
That's a great question. That's something that we're talking about in terms of like there being 3 different waves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, adding shipping in the United States is a relatively easy thing to do in terms of cost. When you
Sure.
start adding free shipping for international, you lose your ass.
So it sounds like potentially you're not making this is not a promise you're making, but it sounds like chances are CONUS, Continental United States, probably will have shipping bundled in. Anywhere else, potential, probable. additional shipping costs?
It's something that we're considering. There's a lot of things that we want to make sure. Like I'm not the biggest fan of like an all-in discount. I feel like that's a waste because the people that were going to go all in, they were going to do it anyway. That it needed a discount. So you should give them something, like literally give them something, right?
Right.
And that's something, you know, we thought we had a really great idea, but unfortunately the factory kind of nixed it. They could do it, but they couldn't get the waves out the way we wanted them to, so we walked away from that. So it's hard, and each platform is different on what it allows you to do and give your customers that option. So
Right.
a lot of
Because when
people
you're
misconstrue that I get to decide everything that happens in the platform, and that's not true at all. They have certain parameters that you have to meet. And so going back to your wave question about like 45 days for one wave, 45 days for the next wave, that's a great idea. Unfortunately, there's not a platform that will allow you to do that because most of the platforms have a requirement that you fulfill your first crowdfund before you start a second crowdfund.
Right. And that's part of why I asked that question, because I'm aware of that. Viewers of the show know that I was involved with a Kickstarter for a film that it got funded. We shot it, hit right in the middle of COVID. We did a premiere this year. We're still fulfilling digital and physical perks because of the nature of all this. And people ask, well, why don't you just do a separate this and that to fund the next movie since you're already in pre-production on it? I was like, well, because we can't yet. So that's something that happens, which is, again, steering back to where we first started talking about the really icky stuff that no one wants to talk about. Like, I don't want to ask you these questions because I want to trust you're just going to do what you're going to do. But the reality of toy collecting and a new IP in 2022, I feel like I have to ask this kind of shit. So
Sure.
I appreciate you being as open as you can be, but I also understand the conundrum under which you're in. And I'm asking you this stuff because a lot of people in chat may not know this. People watching this after the fact, if someone's going to take this video and download it, I see you out there, and they're going to try and cut up your answers and try to come up with some other narrative. I want to get as much information out of you as I can to keep that from happening.
You can only control yourself. You can't control other people. But I do appreciate what you're saying, Jim. And it's kind of funny because I think like on the last interview I did, there was a plethora of people that have done business with me through MAFC for the past 3 years. So those guys definitely know, the integrity that we have. We do full refunds. We don't keep people's money. In fact, if you're unhappy, I don't want your money. I don't need it. But for the uninitiated, the jaded people, the people that just like to be negative overall, the people unhappy in life, that's fine. It is what it is. And some people were justly so, they have been screwed over. There's been some really bad Kickstarters for action figures the last 5 years. So it's horrific. And what some people may not even realize is that, and I'm not trying to defend any of those people, but sometimes those people actually got scammed too. And being where I sit, I've ran into scamsters. They have literally tried to portray themselves as representing a factory that they didn't represent. And and so, I don't know what happened in those other cases, but I can tell you that, in fact, the factory rep that I'm using, the factory rep who works for a lot of other companies as well, 2 different guys have saved several toy companies because the factory that they were using basically just went dark, and they literally had to go get the molds from that factory and move them to a different factory. So that's the kind of stuff that actually does happen that people just don't know about.
And I do want to say that chat's giving you some pretty good support in that they think the $40 price point is fair for the type of thing that you're doing. They think that that's reasonable. They're saying they're supporting the fact that international shipping is a pain in the ass because it is. So again, I'm asking tough questions, but I like the answers I'm hearing so far, and I hope that you're able.
Yeah, I think Michael J is the only one that's really said anything negative so far.
Well, if he doesn't like it, he doesn't like it, and that's okay. And I don't blame him for feeling that way. I don't blame anyone for feeling the way they feel that, because, like, example, Jason Garcia, good friend of the channel. Well, for a potential $600 full line buy, and I don't like, I get that. Because it is a lot of money to ask someone to shell out. And I have a reputation for being a completionist in certain toy lines. And I, I'll be honest, I don't like every design you guys have out. But if the lore is good enough, you might rope me in. And that's probably true of a lot of people that are watching this now or later. Um, but I will say, doing 3 waves of figures 644 in a month and a half, even for someone who's making really good money at work, that's a big ask, man. I think it's a risk. But like you said, it's a new idea. It's a risk. It may work, it may not. When you put the caveat in that you're making it clear that first time buyers, early backers are going to get something for that money, that early investment, and that you're also clearly thinking about the future and making these characters available later, and you're open about that, I think takes some of the edge off. When we talk about that future, after the fundraising has happened, after, that's fulfilled, big question. Are there any thoughts of partnering with Big Bad or other retailers who've supported Kickstarters and make to order ventures like this? Like, what's the future? How are we going to get our hands on these after the fact?
It's a great question and something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. Big Bad usually reaches out to a Kickstarter at a certain point that they think it's going to get funded. And that's when they want to put their own mock inventory up on their website that helps them. What they do in that sense is they use how many people come and buy at their website to justify how many extra that they're going to buy later on.
Sure.
So those are all data points. Now, when you talk about a crowdfunding standpoint, it's much better to have your retailers purchase from you directly and not go through a crowdfunding, because you're paying a percentage of that on top of what you're already giving a retailer a discount on for buying in bulk. So that can be very punishing if you don't handle it the right way. Yes, we have a list of people that have reached out to us, a lot of online vendors who want to participate, and we welcome that. And we're just not ready to discuss that with them at this point, but we happily take their information and let them know that we're going to be in touch.
So my question would be, at what point in the process do you think that's feasible? Because it sounds to me like, and again, I'm putting words in your mouth when I say this, I'm just reading the room. It seems to me that it does not sound like you're going to go down the retail route until after the initial ordering is completed. Would that be accurate?
Well, that's a great question, because if you think about it, it's a two-headed, or at least a double-edged sword. If you let certain retailers start listing, I mean, come on, guys. Everybody's going to be like, no, I'm going to put even though I got to pay more, I'm going to go over to BBTS because that's safer. Now, what's funny is they want that to be safer, but lots of times what would happen is you would see these boutiques put up their stock before BBTS had theirs. Those people will come buy your stock at a cheaper price and then go cancel their pre-order at a higher price at BBTS. So they played it both ways and tried to be, I guess, a knight in shining armor, and that's BS to me. You should, if you don't mind paying extra for a guarantee, then that's what you should stick with, and you shouldn't be playing it both ways. That's just my own personal opinion. So because that's not, and you actually saw boutiques, because of BBTS, change the way that happened, and you started to see BBTS over the past couple of years start fulfilling orders before certain smaller firms would put their figures up for pre-order. Not for pre-order, but for in-stock sales. So that has evolved over the years. I mean, they're not; these guys aren't idiots. They collect toys too. So they're in the same Facebook groups we all are, seeing the same comments. So it's rather humorous sometimes when you see people talk about that kind of thing. But No, it's not that it's going to be starting. It's just a question of when can they start ordering from those people. And at the end of the
Right.
day, it's all about who you trust and you know, who you think is going to get it in. And that goes back to the supply chains. You know, we talked about Valverse and the BPTS having an issue with their first wave because they paid for it to be shipped on over the water, and then most people were having theirs air lifted over because lo and behold, there's not that much price difference right now. There used to be a huge price difference between having something air shipped and boat shipped, and right now there's not that. I mean, when you think about the amount of time you can save 2 to 3 months, it's the price difference isn't as big as it used to be. So that's why you start seeing
money in the pocket versus promised money. Absolutely.
Right.
But when you're working hand to mouth, as I would presume some of the online retailers, whether you want to believe it or not, some of them might be, or they're having a perceived potential loss or whatever, I can see why the other would be preferable. But it's clearly blown up in their face. That is one of the biggest faux pas of BBTS of late. They've typically speaking, they've done right by me, but when I'm getting a Series 2A figure in now from them, and I haven't even gotten Series 1 figure from them. It was speaking about Action Force. I don't want to make this about that line, but we're in context here.
Yeah.
It's clear that they went ahead and sprung for the air shipping this wave because like we don't want to fucking go through this shit again. So it looks like they've learned that lesson, and they're not the only retailer in town, and they're not the only ones that have had that problem. And I think it all factors into the decisions that you're making. And it does sound like you want to try and separate the pre-order culture from the retail culture for the most part, which I think is smart. But you also don't want to alienate the retail culture at that expense. And that's probably something that's difficult to balance. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, here's what you should do. I've never tried to do a toy line. I don't work with that shit. And I certainly don't have a master's degree in logistics and supply chain. So,
well, when someone finds the perfect answer, y'all let me know. I would like to know.
Exactly. So, I did say that we, at a minimum, go 90 minutes. I don't have these kinds of hard hitting questions to last 2 hours, but I do want to open it up for questions in the chat. I want people to stay respectful. I'm not going to bring up questions that have already been answered. I'm not going to bring up questions that are overtly negative for its own sake, but I do want to give you guys a chance to ask Rob what's going on. With that in mind, why don't we take about a minute to 2 minute break? I'll hop back on, set the stage again, but I'll give you some time out of the bright light if that's okay with you.
Sure.
And then we'll come back and get some questions from the fans. Okay.
All right.
All right, pal. See you in a couple minutes. Chat, like I said, if you're going to ask questions, let's be respectful. Let's be pertinent and on topic. I don't think he's going to answer any questions about his favorite color, Guillermo. I see you. Cheeky. I like it. But I'll be back in just a few moments. We'll talk a little bit more. We'll bring Rob back on. All right, so I'm back. I'm going to just pour a beer. We're all going to take a breath. This guy's been through the ringer. Let's be honest. He's done an amazing job. I respect what he has said so far. And it has not diminished my interest in the line one bit. But we have some questions here. And I'd like to get those addressed here. But again, let's be respectful. With that, I'll bring Rob on. Welcome back, sir. I hope the break was beneficial to you.
Yes.
So, no worries. Got a couple really good questions in chat here. From Source Pilgrim asks, can we hear a bit about the lore of the Crucible? I'm sure you don't want to spoil anything, but something to feed our hungry imaginations would be kind of cool. Now, you talked about the concept of it. Are there any contextual plot points or little tidbits, a little nibble. You got anything?
What would I tell you guys? I'll tell you that I think in the first graphic novel, if you look closely, you might see the Titanic. You might see something from the 90s. And
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a very big world. I mean, I think the maps are very interesting when you look at them personally. So I think you can infer certain things from the maps as well. So
yeah. Okay. I think that's a fair answer. Now, hard-hitting question: Pepsi or Coke?
well, that depends on what kind of mood I'm in. I drink.
We are
both,
talking about Coca-Cola, Rob.
I trust me. I know.
Fair enough. You drink them both. So do I. Even though I make my own soda, I have a soda stream. Once in a while, you just can't beat Coke in a glass bottle. That's for sure. So here's a fun one, because you did just do Toylanta from Plunderlings. What upcoming conventions are you planning on attending?
PowerCon. We're going to PowerCon.
Aren't they rebranding?
I don't know they're rebranding, but they're moving. They're going to be in Columbus now.
Yeah, and I heard that they're moving away from being Motu centric, which I think for their brand is a smart move.
Right. Yeah, it's supposed to be more fantasy based, I guess.
I mean, I would love to see more places for companies like yours to be under the spotlight, not be buried in the way that the PowerCon of old, i.e., last year, and previously, there's like Motu, and then you're like this little booth in the corner. I think that if they are moving away from being so focused on He-Man in that universe, the better it's going to be for companies like yours. So I hope that they ring true to that. The track record does not bode well for that, but I hope they give you a fair shake. So PowerCon, what else?
Right now, that's it. That's the only two that we've decided on is Toylanta and PowerCon. There's 2 a year that we want to rotate, and so that we're not doing the same 2. We want to do 4 a year, and there's 2 that we're going to rotate to different parts of the country. Is our initial thinking on it.
So, I know I've seen this somewhere. Where are you based out of, Rob?
Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay. I know the guys who run the Retropalooza conventions, which was previously retro gaming focused, but has expanded to be artisan and toy based as well. It's a very good mix. It's run twice a year, once in Houston, Texas, once in Arlington. If you're interested, at any point, contact me. I'll get you in touch with those folks. They'll give you a really fair deal, really good percentages of tables, things like that. I think it would be a good place to kind of get to a wider audience without having to like water down what you're doing. And because you're in Alabama, it's not a huge ask. I think it might be something. It might be a good for you. So I just want to plant that seed.
Okay.
Next question from my good friend Jim Largo, expatriate, lives in Guatemala, asks if the Savage Crucible graphic novel will be available to e-readers via Amazon or Comixology.
Maybe, or probably just have it where you can download the PDF, or have
so if you make the purchase of the physical, you'll have access to that.
Or maybe it's a gift for the crowdfunding. We're not sure yet. There's a lot of different things that go into that. So, do you sell it? Do you try to ask for donations? If you give it away for free, there are people that in the comic book world, you don't ever want to give a physical hard copy away for free. It just devalues it completely. It's sort of a weird mechanic. So I'm not sure that we're actually going to have hard copies at this point beyond just having something for at conventions to sign. So, yeah, that's something that we just have to think about a little bit.
as a collector, I'm going to plant a seed. If you're not going to do a physical release initially on individual issues, you should consider later down the road hardcover, condensed, not condensed story wise, but get them all in one big digest. Because hardcover stuff, I would buy those up like a motherfucker. Just saying.
Okay.
Physical media, bro. Physical media. It's where it's at. But I understand the business decision. I'm not criticizing. I just want it hard. I want a hardcover. I like hardcovers. Next question from Fight and Code Names. Again, thank you for subscribing to the channel. I see you. Asks, can we order as many figures as you want in the pre-order? Are there limits? That's a good question.
No, there's not any limits on a pre-order.
You're like, no, give us the money. We could use it. And that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. We've talked about some of the various influences that went into this. What would you say is the biggest inspiration for Savage Crucible from a lore perspective?
The biggest?
The biggest. I think you stumped him, Goji.
I don't know. Originally, Purgatory.
Okay. Fair enough. Now, I can infer the answer to this question from what you said, but I don't want to speak for you. The question is, has Rob ever said which of these new figures he's looking forward to the most, personally speaking? There's a lot of variety, so it bears mentioning. What's your favorite right now?
I mean, I love the bad guys. To be honest, that's really tough. Because Jaeger is pretty badass. The Harbinger is badass.
I figured you'd say Harbinger.
Yeah. The Lizard and the Fishman are really nice. Mm-hmm. You know, the Barbarian is definitely a barbarian. The Dwarf's cool. So it's pretty hard, to be honest. But I think Jaeger's got a lot of personality. And I think the Harbinger, there's just so much in his backstory for me that it's pretty interesting. So
Harbinger, final answer?
Yeah, we can go with that.
Okay. I was going to say, if you could take one of these figures, if you only were allowed to make one for yourself, which one would it be? And I'm hoping it would be Harbinger, because that's my personal favorite right now. Oh, here's a good one from Timothy Peak. Will the maps be available for purchase? I like that. It's interesting.
We considered that. The maps actually will be used as a 4-piece tab insert for the packaging. So that'll be what's behind the figure.
So will that be inspired by like where they hail from? So each figure will have the map in the package?
No, because not everybody in Savage Crucible hails from a place that's on a map.
Okay.
At least not in those maps. So no, I just think it's a nice touch, because not everybody goes to the website, obviously, and does a deep dive. So I think getting the figures, it's just nice to pull it out and see, and then realize there's multiple of them. You start to get a feel for, wow, there's a lot more thought in this than I realized.
So if you do that physical release of the comic books in hardcover, you could put the maps in the back. Yeah. I'm just saying, give it free advice, which is really just me going, I want this. Are there going to be any pop culture related characters other than Cthulhu? Please don't say Refrigerator Perry.
Well, MAFC has licensed one pop culture character previously.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe.
Never say never. Okay.
I mean, that is a mechanic of the world that you can bring in different IPs. So, yes.
Okay. Another question from Jim. Will the War Danes be in the first series or the future waves? In other words, I guess for the sake of this question, those first 3-4 waves that's coming out this year for pre-order crowdfunding. Or are the War Danes going to be there or later?
No, it will not be in the first three waves. Actually, Arlen is sculpting that right now. He's putting, I think tomorrow he's going to start, or maybe he started today putting in articulation on that, because we actually sent the sculpt to a couple of AKC judges, and I'm a Great Dane breeder, and my mentor is actually an AKC judge, and so it's something that we really, really wanted to get our own spin on, make sure that we really got some details dialed in on that.
So because you do breed, for those that don't know, you breed Great Danes. This is something very near and dear to your heart. This is one of those ones that sounds like you want to get perfect, and you're not going to rush it for the sake of the. That's fair. I think that's fair.
It's the only character that I've in-depthly looked at the eyes to make sure that they're almond shaped. Okay, just
fair enough. Another question here from Six Bonks Bruh asks, will you ever or have you considered a collaboration with Spiro Toys and the AWOC realm?
Yes, we've already talked about that.
Well, there you go. See, it's not even a hard-hitting question. We're getting stuff that may not be public
I love Jason.
And I'm the one that's drinking.
And the Spiro team. They're a great group of guys.
So, kind of something I meant to ask earlier, but we got so deep into the harder stuff, I didn't want to ask a fun question in the middle of that, because I felt like I wanted to get the beatdown out of the way. So this is kind of a fun question, I think. Given your background with customs, and for those of you who don't know, he runs an entirely different site that he can plug at his leisure that is related directly to customs. How much of that informs your design choices on these characters? How much customization do you think is going to be ready out of the package with these characters? Are they interchangeable? Is it something that you'll be able to like just kind of mix and match and do some crazy shit with, or how does that influence this line?
Yes, that was another tenet of when we were designing the line, is that we want it to be highly customizable and kit bashy in a sense as well. And so I think there's a previous question during the interview where someone asked about packs, what kind of packs and things of that nature. And I can tell you that currently we have slated one armor pack, one head pack, and one weapons pack per archetype. So if there's 6 archetypes, then there are at least 6 head packs, 6 armor packs, and 6 weapon packs.
Will those be pre-painted, or are they going to come blank, or will they have both?
Pre-painted.
Pre-painted. Okay. Will you consider releasing packs of that type that are unpainted for those that want to go custom?
For those packs, I don't think so, simply because there's not an overwhelming amount of paint detail. It's not like eyes on a sword kind of concept.
Sure.
It's not that the weapons are going to be plain or not have a nice paint apps. It's just that, generally speaking, when you think about a sword, there's only so many paint apps you can put on a sword, for the most part. So I don't see the benefit in going blank. It's one of those things where you kind of have to, when you're dealing with blanks and customizers, they buy a lot of product. They customize a lot. This is definitely true. But when you look at the percentage of the market that they are for in terms of selling figures, they're not that big.
It's smaller, and they're going to paint it anyway, right? So it's something where at that point, and this is my feelings on this as well, is that, well, if you're going to repaint it anyway, who cares if the manufacturer put the paint on it or not? I only ask that because I know someone out there's going to be like, well, if I'm going to paint it, just wanted to make sure. That's fair. And I agree with your business choice there. I was just curious. Gochitron with another question. Any plans to do homages to characters from other franchises via repaints, as other lines like Mythic Legions have done?
No.
I think that's a great question. No?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Fair. Now, with your lizard people thing, Are there any nods you could make? Like, could you make alternate heads to lizard people that maybe look like legendary films Godzilla, maybe? Or something like that? Maybe some moth people?
I
Toho,
mean,
they're pretty loosely licensed these days. I'm just saying.
I'll say that, with reptilian or lizard people, certainly in the realm of possibilities to have dinosaur heads. And
Okay.
so why not when you're dealing with monsters and things of that nature? But,
Sure.
that's just monsters per se, not necessarily what I would call homages. When I think of homages, I think of certain paint schemes to popular brand characters, and that's not something I'm associated with.
So, this is a great question from Jim Largo. Any kaiju or old gods in the lore, a la like the ancient ones, or beyond the obviously Cthulhu references we've seen?
Yes.
You see the smile on my face, Rob? You see that smile on my face? Making me happy.
Yes. No, definitely. Yeah. We'll talk about the cults, the 3 different main cults, some other day.
Okay. Since I have a beer in my hand, do you drink? And if so, what's your favorite drink?
I actually don't drink. I very rarely do I ever drink.
Okay.
Nothing
Fair
against
enough.
it. Just a summer, beer like a Corona or something. It's fine by me. When I go on vacation, I'll drink, but for the most part, I just don't. I don't have
Which
time.
is surprising given the amount of pressure you're probably under doing this endeavor. You'd probably be going through a case a day at this point. Shit. And I wouldn't blame you. Well, there's a reason I look like this and you look like that. Because I drink way more. And that's okay. But I'm seeing a lot of folks in chat giving ideas, and Guillermo's like, "Ooh, I love the ideas." Like, there's like a Triceratons, which is kind of like a TMNT reference a little bit. Um, Six bonks and like Aztec, Norse gods. Like, are there other? Are you trying to like kind of dig into a little bit of everything and bring all this stuff together, or is it? Are you cherry picking influences? Because I get the feeling it's almost a cherry pick, but there's also unification there. Can you speak to that?
So the issue you run into is how many characters can you put out legitimately,
Right,
and
right.
that's where you run into the tried and true. Do you want to be a mile wide and an inch deep, or a mile deep and an inch wide? And I think you just have to balance it and see what the feedback is. And the idea is usually you don't want to start something and not finish it, but I think you can create certain parts and packs that allow people to explore certain cultures in that sense.
Okay. So I'm going to close questions out for here because we're going to get too specific, and I think we're getting into that place where it's like, ooh, Rob can hear me. I don't want to go down that road. There's time for that. I think that there's plenty of space when we get closer to an actual uh, crowdfunding pre-order situation where there might be some fun things to talk about after the things we're talking about is not yet revealed are revealed. Certainly, we can open that conversation if Rob wants to come back. That said, I have one last question on the record for you. For the person who is a toy collector that has the deep enough pockets for something like this, that already does boutique, but either hasn't heard of this or heard of it and wrote it off, or to the person who's just on the fence for whatever reason, what would you like to say to those people about the line to try to get them to understand what's different about what you're doing and what you would hope they take away from this endeavor?
I would say that there are a lot of people that I work with, a lot of artists. I mean, a lot of artists who have put their heart and soul into it, and I think they deserve a chance to impress you.
Going to the staff. And I expected a much longer answer, but okay, fair enough. Cheers to the staff, because you got some great talented people on the roster. I'm not going to downplay that for a second. And I at the risk of sounding like an asshole, I'm going to quote a hated character in American action film lore and say, I think this mission has a better than average chance of succeeding rather than fail. So I really do think that what you're trying is ambitious. I think that you're going into it with the right mindset, and you're not. It doesn't sound to me like you're lying to yourself or anybody else about the prospects of this, and you're trying to do the best that you can. And I legitimately and sincerely wish you all the success in the world.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course. And I thank you for taking the time to come on here in general. I know that before we came on, I said, I'm going to ask you some hard questions. Might have gone a little harder than I originally intended to, but I really appreciate your willingness to go there with us. I think it will serve to kind of allay some of the fears people have with this, and I hope that moving forward it can continue to do that. Is there anything else you want to share or say before we go?
No, guys, just tune into Instagram. We have a private Facebook group that we post to as well, and there'll be more information coming. And we might start releasing some information on some of our packs as we get closer. But we're definitely dialing it in. Everybody's working hard, and we're excited because we've been working on this for over 2 years now. So
excellent. Well, Rob, I'm going to go ahead and take you off the hot seat, but I would ask that you stick around for a bit so I can talk to you a bit afterwards. Is that all right?
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Folks, I think that was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done, and certainly more informative than I expected it would be. And I hope that you will agree with me that even if you haven't decided if Savage Crucible deserves your money, it at least deserves your attention, because this is something legitimately different. And whether it's successful or not, it's turning my head. So I hope you feel the same way. Folks, I've got some videos coming out later this week. Depending upon what I'm done editing, will be later. But regardless, I thank you for your time and your viewership, for the super chats, for the likes, and the participation. You guys did a great job in helping us out here. But for those of you that only watch the streams, we'll see you next Monday at the same time. In the meantime, may all your card backs be straight, may all your grinds be merry, and may you be able to find anything you're looking for at any given time at a price you feel is reasonable. I hope you have an amazing week. Take care. I love you. Cheers.